Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Today's story looks at the life and horrific death of Mary Gregory, a 94-year-old grandmother from Heysham in Lancashire, and how her killer had got away with murder until he managed to implicate himself not just once, but on two separate occasions. Mary was a retired teacher who at 94 years of age remained fairly independent and lived alone. She was supported by carers who would visit her several times a day, and despite having been diagnosed with dementia, she managed to retain her independence with this additional support. She lived in a bungalow on Levens Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac in Heysham, where the neighbours knew and looked out for one another. Mary had two sons, Peter, who lived over 250 miles away in London, and Chris, who lived nearby. Mary was proud of her home, where she had lived for many years, and also her beautiful garden, where she would spend a lot of her time. Both Mary's hairdresser, Claire, and one of her carers, Carolina, described Mary as a lovely lady who loved to have a chat with them whenever they visited. She would talk at length about her husband who had sadly passed away, her children, and her grandchildren. In the early hours of the 28th of May 2018, Mary's neighbour heard Mary calling out for help. As the neighbour went outside to find out what was going on, they could see clouds of smoke coming from Mary's house. They rushed back into their home to call the emergency services, then went to the front of the house, where they saw flames coming from the front bedroom window of Mary's house. The emergency services arrived in under 10 minutes and managed to get into Mary's property. They found Mary collapsed under a table in her conservatory, alive but struggling with the effects of severe smoke inhalation. She was stretchered out of the building and rushed to the Royal Lancashire Infirmary, where she was put onto a ventilator. Her family rushed to her side. However, sadly, after several agonising days, Mary passed away. An investigation was launched into the cause of the fire and to determine if there were any suspicious circumstances surrounding the event. Mary was a heavy smoker, and the fire investigators concluded that there was every chance that the fire had been started by a discarded cigarette in Mary's bedroom. This information was passed to the coroner, and the inquest ruled that Mary's death was accidental. The case was closed. However, a year later, the police received a report from a counsellor who had been working with an 18-year-old man in the area. This man, Tiernan Darnton, had disclosed some concerning information during two recent counselling sessions. In the first, Tiernan had stated that he had a friend who could send him to prison because of what the friend knew. The counsellor probed further, and when they asked if Tiernan was trying to state that he had killed someone, Tiernan nodded in reply. At the following session, the counsellor asked Tiernan's stepfather to join the session. Tiernan's stepfather, Chris Gregory, who was one of Mary's sons, and Tiernan was Mary's step-grandson. Despite Chris no longer being in a relationship with Tiernan's mother, he remained very close to the young man and treated him like his own son. When the counsellor began addressing Tiernan's previous confession, Chris immediately questioned whether this was about his own mother. Tiernan confirmed this and stated that he had set fire to Mary's bedroom curtains with a lighter. The counsellor informed the pair that they would have to report this information to the police. However, Chris was completely against this. He told the counsellor that his mother's death had already been referred to the coroner and that it had been ruled an accident. Once the police were notified, Tiernan was arrested and taken into custody for questioning. His solicitor provided a pre-prepared statement in which Tiernan admitted what he had said to his counsellor, but now said that the information was untrue. He claimed to have had a good relationship with Mary and had only said these things to the counsellor due to misplaced guilt ongoing mental health issues, and also attention-seeking behaviour. When further questions were posed by the police, Tiernan simply replied, "No comment." Chris supported Tiernan during the interview process, completely taking his side and refusing to believe that Tiernan had harmed his mother in any way. With only a now retracted confession to go on, the police had no real evidence to confirm innocence or guilt, nor any indication of whether or not to pursue a conviction. Tiernan was living with Chris at the time, and a search was conducted of their home. With the fire having taken place over a year earlier, this search was not looking for forensic evidence, but any digital items or paperwork that could link Tiernan to Mary's death. The police found several sinister items within the house. A notebook was discovered that included a detailed plan of Mary's bungalow. On this plan, all of the entrances and exits were labelled. Notes were added about where jewellery and money were kept, and details of good hiding places and the need for an alibi were also included. The police also found a document headed Kill List, which contained a number of names from Tiernan's social circle and were linked to also his education. However, Mary's name was not on the list. Could there already have been more victims? Was Tiernan planning on killing more people, or was this just an overly dramatic list of people that a teenage boy did not like? The police tracked down every person on the list, and thankfully they were all safe and unharmed. However, two of Tiernan's friends who were on this kill list gave some additional incriminating information to the police. They said that Tiernan had also made a confession to them. A few weeks after Mary's funeral, they were in a group playing Truth or Dare when Tiernan was asked to reveal his darkest secret. He replied, "I have a secret I haven't told anyone. I may have killed someone," adding that he did not want the person that he had killed to suffer anymore. In the context of the game, the friends didn't believe him and shrugged this confession off. As such, they did not report anything to the police. As the police investigated Tiernan further, additional information about his personality came to light. He struggled to make friends and was often lonely. He was removed from the school system around the age of 12 and was homeschooled, leading to increased isolation from his peer group. He never knew who his biological father was, and his mother was particularly overprotective. A friend recalled seeing him walking through the town centre at the age of around 13, having to hold hands with his mother. This same friend also remembered a time when he visited Tiernan at his home, and Tiernan showed him a grey SS uniform, complete with an armband and ornate dagger which he owned. The friend was very uncomfortable, and when he told his own mother, he was forbidden from hanging out with Tiernan again. However, with only circumstantial evidence and the withdrawal of his confession, there simply wasn't enough information to prosecute Tiernan, so he was released on police bail. He had to reside at a specific address and was not allowed to contact any of the witnesses. The police knew that they were potentially releasing a man who was a danger to the public, but their hands were tied. Operation Ellsworth was launched with 30 specialist officers from other parts of the county. They were drafted in to help support the investigation. Digital media investigators were able to obtain the Google search history of Tiernan's laptop both prior to the fire and up to the date when he was arrested. The results were damning. Prior to the murder, searches included under 18 murder, how long do murderers serve in prison, and I want to cause evil, which would later progress to searches such as I'm a murderer, murderer filled with despair, I'm a monster and I'm going to hell, urge to kill again, and I think I'm turning into a serial killer, please help. Whilst these searches could almost be viewed as a confession, it was once again circumstantial evidence. But the amount of circumstantial evidence was beginning to pile up. By the time that the murder inquiry was underway, Mary's bungalow had already been sold and renovated. The only way in which the crime scene could be revisited was through the photographs taken by the crime scene investigators at that time. When these photographs were reviewed through eyes looking for a possible crime and not an accident, they too started to point in a sinister direction. Mary's key safe, which always contained a key so that her family and carers could access her property, was open and empty. Only a few people had the code for this, and the key remained missing. Mary's house was always very tidy and neat, but it could be seen in the photographs that the home telephone had been unplugged from the wall, and the usually tidy, tucked away wires were in a mess next to the cabinet. The smoke alarms at the property had been disabled and taken down from the ceiling. One had been left on top of the cupboard, and the other had been placed inside the cupboard. Mary's carer, Carolina, confirmed that in all of her time working for Mary, the fire alarms had been on the ceiling and in working order. The police had no reason to believe that 94-year-old Mary had suddenly decided to climb on a chair and disable them. A key that was always kept in the door of the conservatory to allow access to the garden had disappeared, and perhaps most sinisterly of all, a coffee table that was usually kept in a different room in the house had been moved to block the conservatory doors. Fortunately, the investigators at the time had also taken detailed photographs of the care log. This was a folder that was kept in the house in which the carers would write down details of Mary's care during each visit. This was to enable continuity between different carers and family members. This log allowed the police to build a detailed picture of the day before Mary's death. Mary's carer, Carolina, had visited on 3 separate occasions that day for breakfast, lunch, and an evening visit. When she arrived for the evening visit between 6:30 and 7 p.m, the front door was open and the key was still in the lock. Mary was sat in the conservatory and was very angry. Tiernan was also at the house and, as he commonly did, was eating Mary's food and generally making a mess. Tiernan and Mary had argued in front of Carolina. After Tiernan left, Carolina calmed Mary down and made her a cup of tea before leaving. It was the last time she ever saw Mary. There was so much evidence that pointed to Tiernan being guilty of what he had originally confessed to, but this still fell short of the level needed for a successful prosecution. The investigation continued. During an interview with one of Mary's neighbours, they recalled that on the date of the fire, she had seen Mary's lights on and her garage door open at around 1 a.m. The neighbour was concerned by this, so called Mary's son Chris to let him know. She thought that she would speak to Chris, but instead spoke to Tiernan, who informed her that Chris was away and he was looking after Mary and her house. Tiernan informed the neighbour that he would sort it out in the morning. A couple of hours later, a milkman recalled seeing the garage door open at the property, but this time the lights were out. When the fire service arrived, the garage door had been closed. Someone had definitely been at the house, but the police had to prove that this person was Tiernan. In April 2020, 23 months after the fire, the police finally got the breakthrough which they so desperately needed. Included within the photographs taken after the fire was a picture of the kitchen bin. The police knew what should be in there from the details provided in the carer's log of the food and drink given to Mary. However, they could not account for a carrier bag which was right at the top of the bin. This bag was from a local garage and contained some Tunnocks tea cake wrappers and an empty can of Coke. Things that Mary never ate or drank. This was on top of the rubbish put in the bin by the carers and had obviously been placed there after the carers had left for the day. The police visited the local garage, but with little hope that this almost 2-year-old transaction would lead somewhere. As expected, the CCTV had long gone, but their computerised till system allowed the parameters of date and product to be included that subsequently showed that it was Tiernan that had purchased the tea cakes and can of drink on his way to Mary's house that night. The police finally had the evidence that they needed to place Tiernan at the scene of the fire. He was arrested and charged with Mary's murder. In November 2021, he pleaded not guilty to the charge. His defence team stated that he hadn't gone to Mary's house that night and that he was not responsible. Chris was extremely loyal to Tiernan and was also called as a witness for the defence. When Tiernan took the stand, he was very confident in the evidence that he gave. He wanted to portray himself as a doting grandson who had done nothing wrong but suddenly changed his version of events. He admitted that he was responsible for Mary's death, but claimed that it was a mercy killing as he didn't want her to suffer anymore. On the 11th of November 2021, the jury returned a guilty verdict. At the sentencing hearing, the judge said that they rejected the notion that it had been an act of mercy by the then 17-year-old, stating that no one could seriously think that trapping an elderly woman in a burning building was an act of mercy. Murder had been on your mind for some time. You were fascinated by serial killers and their crimes. You had dark thoughts. Before sentencing, Tiernan's lack of remorse and untruthful evidence were noted, as well as the fact that he was a minor at the time that the offence was committed. Tiernan was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years before parole would be considered. Mary's son Peter told the court that the actions of Tiernan, who had no biological or legal connection with our family whatsoever, continued to have repercussions throughout his family. Having learned that my mum's death was at the hands of Tiernan Darnton, whom we had willingly welcomed into our family home, is disgusting and shattering. He was frequently in Mum's house in the final months leading to her death. She despised and distrusted him and did not want him anywhere near her. He went on to say that he must now live with the burden that his brother did not listen to his mother's warnings and even gave Tiernan access to the keys to her home. Peter also added that he had never accepted that Mary had died in an accident. Thanks for listening to today's case. Please click like, comment down below and subscribe to the channel. Today's petty crime is located in Providence, Rhode Island. Meeson has sent in their much-loved kitten, Moon. His crimes include screaming at the top of his lungs when he hears Meeson walking about. Moon is a prolific climber and loves to climb the brick walls in his house. His breed is a Maine Coon, but as his name is Moon, Meeson says he is a Moon Coon breed. Yeah, thanks very much for sending in new potential petty criminals. They will be featured in the weeks and months to come. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Heysham is well known for its Viking Festival. Find out more on Facebook or heyshamvikingfestival.co.uk. Also, St. Peter's Church is one of the oldest places of Christian worship in West Europe. It also has 8 rock graves dating back to the 10th century. Goodbye.